Good day, everyone! Londononion here, returning with another build fitting for the Apocalypse difficulty. For today's build, we continue with the Alchemist as prime, and will accompany with the Invader as our secondary. Looking at our agenda today, we'll start off with a build exposition, transition to determining its designation, and end off with a discussion on biome efficacy. Let's get started. Starting off with the armor of this build, this onion equips the Radiant armor set with the exception of the gauntlets. Instead, the Crimson gauntlets are equipped and brings our encumbrance to a heavy 62 units. As for the relic, this onion prioritizes the Runed Heart with a secondary favor for the Shielded Heart, but that will be a discussion for a later installment. Moving on to our weapons, the primary this onion equips is the famous monorail and attaches the supercharger mutator for reduced charge time and increased critical chance. For the secondary, the bolt driver is equipped with Song of Aether and the refunder mutator for increased ammo longevity for both weapons. Lastly, the melee weapon equipped is the spectral blade with the transference mutator for increased ammo longevity and reload speed. Transitioning to the integral accessories, the amulet leading this build is the Difference Engine. While a shield is active, all damage is increased by 20%, and one gains 4.5% of base damage dealt as lifesteal. The rings this onion equips are the Leaking Gemstone, Anastasia's Inspiration, Generating Band, and Closed Loop. Leaking Gemstone grants 20% of mod power generation to continue during the active mod. Anastasia's Inspiration grants haste for 10 seconds when receiving healing effects. Generating Band grants 3% of one's max health per second while a shield is active. Lastly, Closed Loop grants a 5% shield for 10 seconds following a charged shot and maxes out at 25%. The skills this onion employs are Stone Mist for the Alchemist and Reboot on the Invader. Before we move on, it's not an Alchemist build without concoctions, to which this onion consumes Bark Extract for increased armor, Xenoplasm for skill cooldowns, Root Water for health regeneration, and either Shadeberry for increased mod power generation or Dark Fluid for increased evade distance and reduced stamina cost. However, this onion favors the Shadeberry concoction. Moving on to the traits, this onion steals the Engineer's Fortify, borrows 8 units of the Challenger's Strongback, plagiarizes the Explorer's Swiftness, and applies Vigor, Expertise, Barkskin, Chakra, Recovery, and Perception. Due to the selections, our encumbrance is now in the medium range, while our armor is boosted to 271.4 units. Tapering off with our prism, the fragments we equip are firearm charge time, mod power generation, and use speed. The fusions are munitions, meta, protected, and pirate, with reload speed taking over the remaining slot. With our build complete, we can now transition to our build designation. For the designative process, I use a personally constructed build matrix to help illustrate the function of a given build. Builds are broken down into 2 camps: tacticians and predators. Predators have a greater prowess in close range / melee combat and have a reactive and aggressive-like strategy toward enemy encounters. Tacticians, on the other hand, excel in mid to far range combat and have a proactive and strategic approach to enemy encounters. The North and South poles are modifiers of the previously explained combat orientations. Specialized builds refine the main combat method to control for optimized carnage and execution. Such builds tend to be narrow in attack pattern and may struggle in circumstances that aren't conducive to their main means of offense and defense. They are, however, unparalleled when circumstances are conducive to their niche. Dynamic builds diversify offensive/defensive methods to be effective toward as many enemies / circumstances as possible. Such builds come with the shortcoming of overly convoluted use and stagnated offense due to a lack of simplified capitalization. This in turn leads us to the lines. Each line acts as a designation and are present to varying degrees within each build. Determining our designation will be based on our evaluation of function. The more nuanced the evaluation is, the more likely it is a dynamic fighter / kiter. The more lopsided the evaluation, the more likely it is a specialized juggernaut / cannon. With this in mind, we'll move on to the evaluation. Starting off with offensive capability, we have the greatest and most frequent damage numbers, and this holds the greatest weight in this category. With a very quick look at each weapon's performance, the greatest damage numbers reside with the monorail. However, the most frequent damage numbers reside with the bolt driver. This naturally begs the question of damage over time. In a race to 20,000 damage units, the monorail easily gaps the bolt driver after the first magazine. Assuming proper full charges without mod use, the monorail will reside in the low to mid 500s by the time 20,000 damage units have been inflicted, while the bolt driver will hug the low to mid 400s. For ease of use, the Spectral Blade easily takes this one, especially with its Whirlwind mod. Lastly, practicality/applicability. Each of our weapons have their niche. Spectral Blade is close range, Bolt Driver is close to mid-range, and the monorail is mid to far range. It's just a matter of which one spreads most outside of said niche. The one that seems to extend the most is the monorail. Even though it benefits most as a mid to far range weapon, its varied charging state can allow a more nuanced means of eliminating targets depending on their profile. Weak enemies, for example, are quickly dispatched with a weakly charged shot and can extend to close range skirmishes, albeit with the greater demand on dexterity per round. Transitioning to restorative and defensive capability, health regeneration is either the result of one's relic, root water concoction, or difference engine and generating band due to shield activation. Outside of shield activation, this one is neutral. Tying in shield activation though, the monorail will have the greatest potential for generating health due to lifesteal and charged shots. This is increased with mod use. The bolt driver will accumulate shields faster due to more frequent bursts, but the lifesteal is far less effective. So for health regeneration, the monorail takes the victory, but for shields, the bolt driver takes the victory. Lastly, damage reduction is granted through skill usage, but that is a synergy discussion, which will be covered next. So moving on to build synergy. This is an important one, as it tends to be a tiebreaker by ascertaining the inherent scope/direction of the build. Looking at our amulets and rings as a whole, both the bolt driver and the monorail have similar benefits with shield activation, damage buffs, and lifesteal. However, leaking gemstone is a crucial addition to the success of the monorail. While recoil dampener is active, one can continue to generate mod power and have consecutive activations. As for the fragment and prism enhancements, munitions, and meta play directly into the monorail's prowess, while pirate benefits all weapons. This onion will also throw in relic effects. It was chosen due to its mod generation. This will then tie into the synergy of skill and weapon enhancements. Now, the reboot skill of the Invader is integral to the overall meta of this build. The main use of reboot is to create decoys and keep our mod power topped off with relic use. This will allow a frequent use of Song of Ether and recoil dampener. Stone Mist, on the other hand, is meant to reduce damage and staggering effects to some extent, which can aid in both a ranged and melee context. Overall though, there is a focus on the optimization of the monorail. With the evaluation complete, this onion has determined that our deceiving Deadeye is a tactician, more specifically, a cannon type. Cannons prioritize the most efficient means of enemy elimination, particularly at a range. The meta behind this build is in the title. The deception naturally comes from the Invader skill, Reboot, while the Deadeye is produced by the Song of Ether mod. Slowed enemies greatly increase the efficacy and ease of use of the monorail, regardless of range. Additionally, the use of the Runed Heart and the Leaking Gemstone will allow a more frequent use of the monorail's dampened recoil for maximized damage. The Alchemist Stone Mist is intended to have a two-pronged use. Primarily, it is meant as a means of optimizing damage reduction and reducing stagger, especially in a close quarters combat skirmish. Its secondary use, though, is to, again, optimize the use of the monorail. In circumstances where the Song of Ether is not available or inappropriate, one may employ Stone Mist to offer damage reduction as a means of tanking damage to get a shot off. This will, of course, require calculated risk. Otherwise, as a build that has the most success at a range, increased movement speed, and lightened encumbrance are necessary for our Deceiving Deadeye's success. As a non-dynamic build, this build operates best when stationary or with as little demand in movement as possible. This is all for the purpose of putting every round to good use. The more one must maneuver, the more stress is placed on this specialization to function optimally. With the build blueprint ascertained, we will now move on to our biome efficacy discussion. Now this discussion will take place across 3 fronts: biome topography, crowds, and elites. This won't be an exhaustive discussion, but areas of significance will be given some exposition in a synthesis-like format. Starting off with topography, given the nature of the Deceiving Deadeye, it benefits most while in spacious or at the very least varied zones. With this in mind, Yeisha and Nerud would have preferred topography, while Losam would be less forgiving in high-pressure circumstances. While playing through the different biomes, Losam had a greater frequency of stressful skirmishes, due to more cramped battlegrounds, though to be fair, every biome has its spacious and cramped zones. However, environment is not everything, and this will transition us to the meat of this segment, starting off with crowds. Crowds are broken down into homogeneous and mixed profiles, then extends to crescendos and gauntlets, which bleeds into elite presence. Homogeneous groups of foes aren't typically a problem unless they are in a tight space for an extended period of time. Reboot and Stone Mist are very helpful skills to employ, as one can take extra damage and lead their enemies around like a matador, but it can only last so long, and our use speed is accelerated but not well suited for high pressure circumstances. The monorail technically can be used in close range, but as touched on earlier, there is a higher demand on dexterity, and consequently a thinner margin for error. Sticking with the bolt driver and the spectral blade, or behaving more like a kiter in this onion's words, is necessary for one's survival in extended high-pressure skirmishes. Mixed profiles have a similar assessment, unless they are a mixture of ranged and melee-based enemies. All melee-based enemies can create overcrowding, and will eventually demand more predator-like tactics to be mixed in, while ranged and melee-based allow more breathing room to operate as a tactician. As far as crescendos go, with correct proactivity, they can be easier than gauntlets, as they tend to be more spacious and offer alternative terrain to use to one's advantage. Crescendos can typically allow our Deceiving Deadeye to maintain a defensible position, or at least periodically move around from one advantageous position to another. This is notable in Losam's Great Hall Feast, and Root Earth's Ashen Wasteland or Corrupted Harbor. Gauntlets like Yeisha's Chimney or Nerud's Terminus Station force a more dynamic strategy, as one has to battle their way through enemies and will have to do so with haste. Yeisha's Infested Abyss is not timed, nor does it necessarily force movement, but has a constant negative status effect while in the red haze. The consumed root water makes this easier to take on. The main difficulty of the Infested Abyss, in this onion's opinion, is the volume of elites. However, dealing with low-volume tough targets is actually the strength of this build. With properly placed shots, whether critical, weak spot hits, or both, our Deceiving Deadeye will have no problem putting elites to rest with nearly unmatched efficiency. At the same time, this build is not a tank, but this onion would not classify it as a glass cannon either. At most, the previous root nexus points are more dangerous than the final one, strictly because they are higher pressure circumstances and force dynamic strategies for an extended period of time. Terminus Station is a timed gauntlet, but the enemies are not terribly difficult to eliminate. This gauntlet has a series of long and narrow corridors for combat. Initially, this is rather simple and plays into the strength of our Deceiving Deadeye. It is the end of this gauntlet that is the most difficult, as it is a cramped space of mixed profiles, and a shielded drone carrier elite at the end. Proper skill use gives one a solid chance to triumph. However, this gauntlet does outline some blatant weaknesses of this build. There is one painful cautionary note that deserves exposition. The monorail, in all of its devastating glory, can end one's onslaught without careful use of its charging feature. Outside of mod use, the initial sound cues before overcharging are paramount for proper timing of closed loop, maximized damage, and hazard reduction. In this onion's experiments, there is no consistency for when the monorail will blow up beyond its maximum charge. Consequently, Firing at the end of the second beep and no further will guarantee one's safety. The inconsistency begins after the first overcharge chime. In the heat of high-pressure circumstances, it can be easy to miss the beeps of the weapon and underestimate the charge level. This is especially hazardous when reaching the end of one's mod duration. Steering away from weapon limitations, our elemental resistances are an Achilles heel, particularly with shock damage. The robot grunts of Darude, or even aberrations with the Shocky Mutator, are especially dangerous without the use of Stone Mist. Even with Stone Mist though, our Deceiving Deadeye can easily meet their demise. This last one is more of an offensive limitation with the build, specifically with aberrations. Aberrations with Teleporter, or Displacer Mutators, are particularly annoying. When using the monorail against them, a good portion of the effort to deal heavy damage will be regularly wasted, as they can completely ignore issued damage or throw off the attack pattern of our Deceiving Deadeye. Additionally, empathy can be problematic if one is not delivering overcompensating damage, but most aberrations can be eliminated with ease, even if they have this as a mutator. One should just ensure they are responding with the monorail afterwards. That is, after all, a major point behind relic use. Overall, Yeisha and Darude were the most favorable biomes to play through with this build. The topography is favorable to the most advantageous combat style. However, a good portion of enemy profiles favor electrical-based attacks, and can have an easy time putting this build down without proper diligence. As always, certain gauntlets and crescendos do create some challenge, but every build has its strengths and weaknesses based on their makeup. This is, however, only 1/3 of the story for the true efficacy of this build. Tune in next week for part 2, where we will take a deep dive on this Deceiving Deadeye's efficacy against bosses. It has been Londononion, and I will see you guys next time.